People vanish in the Appalachian Mountains more often than most maps suggest. Some step off a trail and never return. Others are heard calling in the distance, yet are never found. Strange warnings echo through these forests. Don't answer voices. Don't leave the path. Don't follow sounds at night. Real cases remain unresolved. Records incomplete. Identities missing for decades. What is happening in these mountains? And why do the same patterns keep repeating in the same places? Where the trail names keep old stories. In the Appalachian Highlands, people have long used story to label places that are hard to read in daylight and harder to read at dusk. Ridgelines carry names that sound like memory rather than measurement. Hikers learn them as navigation points, while nearby towns learn them as warnings, jokes, or family sayings repeated without a clear first speaker. A name can be practical and still hold a shadow. Blood Mountain in North Georgia is a mapped summit and a marked high point on the Georgia section of the Appalachian Trail. It is also a place where older traditions and later retellings have overlapped for generations, leaving a landscape that is both ordinary and densely narrated. Folklore in Appalachia is often treated as if it is only about the supernatural. In daily life, it is more often about conduct, orientation, and what to do when the forest stops behaving like a park. Many Appalachian traditions describe the woods as a social space with rules. Some of those rules are expressed through figures called haints, boogers, or unnamed presences, with the emphasis placed on what a person should avoid doing alone, what a person should not say aloud, and what a person should do when they lose the line of a trail. Those traditions vary by community and by family, and they are not a single unified system. What stays consistent is the way story becomes a tool for controlling risk. The story does not need to be believed in a literal way to influence behavior. It can still slow someone down, or push someone to keep moving, or keep someone from stepping off a path to take a shortcut. In the southern Appalachians, Cherokee Place traditions are part of this layered map, and they are often repeated in public forms like historical markers and local heritage writing. One commonly repeated tradition connected to Blood Mountain describes it as a place associated with the Nunahi, spirit people sometimes described as immortals, who could shelter lost travelers and guide them back. This is presented as a protective tradition rather than a predatory one, and it sits alongside other explanations for the mountain's name that point to conflict memory and the color of vegetation. The important point for how folklore functions is not which explanation a visitor prefers. Other Appalachian legends travel in a different direction, attaching to lights, sounds, and distance. In western North Carolina, the Brown Mountain Lights became widely discussed in the early 20th century. The lights were investigated with instruments, and a U.S. Geological Survey report from that work recorded that many observed lights were consistent with ordinary sources like automobile headlights, along with other known causes such as fires. The lights still remain in popular storytelling, sometimes with details added later and placed into older time periods. That pattern is common in folklore. A brief event, a confusing observation, or a rumor becomes stable and portable, then gets adjusted to fit the listener's expectations. The result is a landscape that feels populated even when a person is alone. Missing person events in Appalachia sit uncomfortably inside this story-saturated map. A disappearance can occur for reasons that are plain and documented, while still being retold in the language of older warning tales. The retelling does not require fraud. It often happens because people reach for familiar words when they describe fear and uncertainty. The risk is that a folklore frame can become a substitute for careful description. It can also become a way to speak about danger without naming its most ordinary forms. On the 1st of January 2008, Meredith Hope Emerson, a 24-year-old woman living in Georgia, went hiking on Blood Mountain with her dog, Ella. She was last seen on that New Year's Day hike in the North Georgia mountains. Witness accounts later placed her with an older man on a connecting trail near the area where hikers leave the Appalachian Trail and return to a parking lot. When she did not return as expected, people close to her reported her missing and searched for her, and a larger search followed. The way this event was talked about locally was shaped by the mountain's reputation long before anyone knew what had happened to her. Blood Mountain already carried a name that suggested harm, and it sat on a trail system that attracts strangers, solo hikers, and people passing through. In such places, rumors form quickly because there is always movement and always a reason someone might not be recognized. The absence of a person becomes a blank space that can be filled by almost any story shape. For the people doing the work of searching, the blank space has to be narrowed with times, locations, and verified sightings. Gary Michael Hilton, a drifter later identified in reporting as a suspect, was arrested on the 4th of January 2008. News reporting from the period describes him pleading guilty and receiving a life sentence in relation to Emerson's killing, with court proceedings occurring in late January 2008. The case became tied to a broader set of safety warnings about isolated trail corridors and the vulnerability of hikers moving alone. It also became one of the incidents that people refer to when they talk about the Appalachian backcountry as a place where something can step out from behind the trees. In this case, what stepped out was not a ghost story, it was a person. The significance of the Emerson case to the topic of Appalachian folklore is not that it confirms legends, it is that it shows how easily a folklore environment can form around a very real and very documented event. A location name that was already thick with stories becomes even heavier after a crime. Later hikers arrive having heard fragments. Some know the details, and some know only the tone. The tone then spreads faster than facts, because tone fits into the old sayings people already have. In many Appalachian communities, folklore is also used to describe practical forms of disorientation. People speak about being turned around, about a ridge, pulling you off, about hearing a call that does not match any known voice. These are often ways of talking about the ordinary mechanics of getting lost in complex terrain, especially in low visibility or unfamiliar weather. The language makes the experience shareable. It gives a lost person a script to describe what happened without admitting carelessness or panic. That matters because shame can delay reporting and delay rescue. At the same time, a folklore script can blur the difference between environmental risk and human risk. Dense hardwood forests and steep drainages can hide a person who has fallen. They can also hide a person who intends harm. A story about lights, voices, or presences can make both risks sound similar at the moment they are described, even though they require very different responses. Law enforcement records, court reporting, and search documentation exist to keep those categories separate, but the public conversation around a mountain often does the opposite. It combines everything into one mood. In Appalachia, that mood is reinforced by the way people learn the land. A visitor reads a map. A local may also carry a second map made of names, family warnings, and remembered incidents. Those two maps overlap at trailheads and parking lots, where a person can step from road noise into tree cover in a few minutes. Folklore persists there because it provides continuity. A ridge looks the same from year to year, while the people walking across it change constantly. A story holds the ridge still in the mind, even when the details of any single event remain unresolved. Small instructions that travel between campfires. Many hikers first hear Appalachian caution not from guidebooks, but from ordinary conversation at trailheads, shelters, or small-town diners near the mountains. The instructions sound informal. Someone may mention that if the woods suddenly feel unfamiliar, it is better to stop moving than to press forward. Another person might say that when the forest grows quiet, the safest decision is to remain where the last clear landmark was seen. These statements circulate quietly. They are rarely framed as rules written down anywhere, yet they are repeated often enough that visitors begin to treat them as part of the terrain itself. In Appalachian communities, such remarks are not always described as safety advice. They are sometimes passed along in the language of folklore. A person might say that the forest can turn you around, or that the hills walk you away from the trail. These phrases describe a common backcountry problem in indirect terms. Dense hardwood forests reduce long-distance visibility, and repeating ridges can appear nearly identical from different angles. When a traveler loses the orientation of a trail corridor, the mind tends to construct a false direction that feels correct. Folklore vocabulary captures that sensation without requiring technical explanation. Older Appalachian storytelling traditions already contained words for this type of confusion. Some families describe it as the woods, taking you in circles. Others use names for presences or forces that distract a traveler's attention. These sayings vary widely from place to place. What remains consistent is their practical function. They encourage people to remain cautious in an environment where landmarks can disappear quickly once a path is left behind. Trail culture reinforces these cautionary habits because many Appalachian routes cross remote terrain where small mistakes have long consequences. The Appalachian Trail itself runs more than 2,000 miles from Georgia to Maine, and large sections pass through steep forested ridges with limited road access. A person stepping off the trail for only a few minutes can lose visual contact with the corridor. When that happens, the familiar pattern of white blazes and worn footpath disappears, replaced by vegetation that looks nearly identical in every direction. Search and rescue training materials often describe a related pattern known as linear travel bias. When people become uncertain of their position, they frequently continue walking in what feels like a straight line. In heavily forested areas, this movement can carry them deeper into unfamiliar terrain instead of returning them to a known route. Appalachian folklore expresses the same idea through simpler language. Stories say the woods can pull you off the trail. In practice, both descriptions refer to the same navigational error. A well-documented disappearance on the Appalachian Trail demonstrates how this pattern can unfold even among experienced hikers. Geraldine Jerry Largay, a 66-year-old retiree from Brentwood, Tennessee, was hiking the Appalachian Trail as part of a long-distance trek north toward Maine in the summer of 2013. She had adopted the trail name Inchworm, a common tradition among hikers attempting the full route. On the 22nd of July, 2013, Largay was traveling through a remote section of the trail in western Maine, near Reddington Township. According to reporting and later official accounts, she stepped off the trail briefly to use the bathroom. When she attempted to return, she could no longer locate the narrow footpath. This small deviation became the starting point of a prolonged disappearance. After she failed to appear at a planned checkpoint, fellow hikers and relatives reported her missing. The Maine Warden Service organized a large search operation involving wardens, volunteers, tracking dogs, and aircraft. News reports later described the effort as one of the largest search operations in the agency's history. Despite these efforts, the search teams did not locate her. The terrain in that region includes thick spruce and fir stands that can conceal even a brightly colored tent or pack. Vegetation also absorbs sound quickly, making calls difficult to hear beyond short distances. These environmental conditions complicate search efforts and contribute to why some missing hikers remain undetected, even when searchers pass nearby. More than 2 years later, on the 14th of October 2015, a person surveying land in Reddington Township discovered a campsite containing skeletal remains and hiking equipment. Authorities later confirmed the remains belonged to Geraldine Largay. The site was located in dense forest, roughly 2 miles from the Appalachian Trail corridor. Investigators recovered personal items at the campsite, including a journal and a mobile phone. Unsent text messages on the phone indicated she attempted to contact her husband after realizing she was lost. These records suggested she survived for several weeks after leaving the trail before eventually dying in the woods. The details of the Largay case illustrate how a disappearance can develop quietly without any sudden event. A short step away from a marked path can lead to confusion, and confusion can lead to movement that increases the distance from the trail. Dense vegetation and irregular terrain then hide the person from search teams that may already be operating nearby. In Appalachian storytelling, incidents like this often transform into simplified warnings. The explanation becomes that the woods themselves mislead travelers. This form of explanation travels quickly because it condenses a complex chain of small errors into a single memorable phrase. A hiker hearing such a warning might not know the specific details of the original case. The lesson still circulates. These informal warnings function almost like a second map layered on top of the official one. The official map shows elevation, shelters, and trail intersections. The folklore map shows places where people say the forest feels confusing or where someone once disappeared. The two maps do not contradict each other. They operate in parallel. Visitors moving through Appalachian forests therefore encounter more than just terrain. They encounter a network of inherited instructions that shape how people behave in the backcountry. Some of those instructions come from decades of documented incidents. Others originate from older traditions about respecting the woods. Both continue to circulate because the landscape encourages caution. The quiet rules repeated around Appalachian trails rarely attempt to explain every detail of a disappearance. Instead, they emphasize restraint. Stop when the path disappears. Do not assume the trail will reappear if you keep walking. Pay attention to the last place that looked familiar. These statements travel through conversation rather than formal instruction, yet they remain widely recognized among hikers who spend time in the region. The valleys where distance becomes unreliable. In the mountains, distance is not a straight number that stays the same in every direction. A mile measured on a map can behave like something else on the ground, depending on slope, vegetation, and how a ridge blocks sound. A person can hear voices and assume they are near a shelter, then walk for an hour and find only another fold in the land. A person can see a break in the trees and treat it like a way back, then discover it drops into a drainage that leads away from the intended route. The error is not always a dramatic mistake. It often begins as a small adjustment that feels reasonable at the time. Appalachian folklore contains many ways of describing this kind of misreading without using technical language. Local talk may describe a hollow that keeps you, a ridge that turns you, or a gap that moves farther as you approach it. The phrases differ by region and by family, and they can be said with humor or with seriousness. What they describe in plain terms, is how repeated terrain can interrupt a person's sense of direction. The mountains do not need to be unusual for this to happen. Ordinary features can produce it reliably. A common setting for these errors is a high, grassy opening along a crest, where multiple drainages begin and run in opposite directions. From a crest, a traveler may feel there are only two sides to choose from. In practice, each side divides into smaller channels that look similar when viewed through trees. A path can exist as a thin line across a field, then disappear into forest where the tread blends into leaf litter. Even when a person remains close to a trail, the land can impose a false sense of distance. The far side of a field can look near. A nearby campsite can be out of earshot. A stream that seems like a safe handrail can curve into a wrong watershed. One well-documented disappearance in the Great Smoky Mountains shows how quickly this kind of landscape can erase certainty. Dennis Lloyd Martin, a child from Knoxville, Tennessee, was last seen on the 14th of June, 1969, around 4:30 p.m. in the Spence Field area on the Appalachian Trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. His family group had come to Spence Field after staying the prior night at Russell Field, a nearby shelter on the same ridge system. The record preserved in the park's case file describes the moment of separation in ordinary detail. Several adults were sitting in a grassy spot, while Dennis, his older brother, and two other boys played nearby. The children planned to surprise the adults. Three of the boys moved in one direction, while Dennis went another way with the intention of approaching from a different angle. The time the boys split up is described as the last time Dennis was seen. Spence Field sits on the main Smokies Ridge, where the state line runs along the crest, and the park's narrative notes that north drainages flow toward Tennessee, while south drainages flow toward North Carolina. This matters because it is a place where downhill is not a single direction. Several trail options connect to the field on both sides, including Anthony Creek and Butte Mountain on the Tennessee side, and Eagle Creek and Jenkins Ridge on the North Carolina side, with the Appalachian Trail itself running along the ridge. A person making a quick decision in that setting can commit to a drainage that feels familiar while moving farther from where help is likely to be looking. The same document describes the first response by family members in terms that reflect how distance can be misread during urgent searching. Dennis's father began calling for him within minutes and moved west on the Appalachian Trail toward Little Bald, then farther toward Russell Field, then back to Spence Field, repeating sections as he tried to cover ground quickly. Those movements were not random. They followed the corridor that made sense as the most likely route a child might wander onto, and they reflected the assumption that if someone remained near the trail, they would eventually intersect it again. That assumption is often reasonable, yet it can fail in terrain where short-side movements lead into brush, drainages, and low-visibility slopes. The park chronology also records how weather altered the search environment almost immediately. Heavy rain, storms, and thundershowers moved in around dark, with precipitation estimated at about 2.5 inches or more in the Spence Field area, raising streams and hampering search activity. Rain changes what distance feels like. Sound becomes less useful. Footing becomes slower. The edges of trails and openings lose definition. A person moving through wet forest can leave fewer readable traces, while searchers are forced to divide attention between terrain hazards and scanning for clues. By the next morning, the record describes a structured effort involving trail and drainage searches, with experienced personnel working down likely watercourses and along access routes, including the Eagle Creek Trail, which the narrative notes had not been accounted for on the first day. The logistics described in the chronology show how a single high field on a ridge can generate many possible paths outward, each requiring time and personnel to check. Helicopter support was sought for moving equipment and supporting operations at the base camp. Assistance expanded to include rescue squads, student groups, and military resources as the search scaled up. In settings like this, Appalachian folklore often functions as a vocabulary for why someone can be nearby and still not found. People speak about the woods holding on to sound, or the hollows swallowing a person from view, or the ridge sending someone to the wrong side. Those phrases are not evidence about what happened. They are a way of describing the same physical conditions that search narratives document: steep slopes, thick growth, and a branching system of drainages that divides movement into many plausible directions. In public memory, the land becomes a character because its geometry repeatedly produces the same human error. The Spence Field chronology reads as a technical document, but it indirectly explains why a place can generate enduring legend. The record identifies a ridge with multiple connecting trails, a short interval between last sighting and alarm, and a sudden weather event that degraded conditions. Each element is ordinary on its own. Together, they create a situation where distance stops behaving in an intuitive way. A child can move only a short span and still become separated by brush and slope. A call can travel poorly. A searcher can pass a line of trees and miss a concealed depression. Later retellings of the Martin disappearance often adopt the older Appalachian habit of describing confusing terrain as if it acts intentionally. That habit persists because it matches the lived experience of navigating steep hollows and ridges where visibility is low and direction can flip at a watershed boundary. The folklore does not need to explain the event for people to repeat it. It only needs to describe the sensation that the land can defeat a person's sense of nearness. In the Great Smoky Mountains case file, the landscape itself is described with the kind of specificity that folklore usually lacks, including how the state line and watershed divides sit at the apex of the field. That detail makes the setting clearer without assigning it a motive. It also shows why certain places in Appalachia become attached to disappearance stories more strongly than others. High fields, ridge junctions, and drainage heads are points where small deviations multiply. Those are also the points that communities tend to name, revisit, and talk about because they are memorable and because they sit at the edge between open ground and forest. The continuing presence of such stories in Appalachia rests partly on geography and partly on the way people pass along caution. A ridge can hold multiple meanings at once. It can be a recreation corridor, a boundary line, a watershed divide, and a remembered last seen location. In that overlap, distance becomes unreliable in two senses. It becomes hard to measure with the eyes, and it becomes hard to measure in language once the event is retold beyond the official record, when sound becomes the only map. A trail corridor can be invisible in bad light, even when it is only a short distance away. Leaf litter softens footprints. Wind turns spoken words into scattered pieces. Water noise fills the gaps between calls. In those conditions, people stop navigating by what they see and start navigating by what they think they hear. The mountains in the Appalachian Range make this shift easy because ridges break sound into layers. A shout can seem close from one angle and far from another. A voice can carry across a notch, then disappear a few steps later behind spruce and rock. Appalachian folklore keeps a vocabulary for that uncertainty. In some communities, a warning about night sound is phrased as a rule about not answering calls you cannot place. The same warning appears in hiking culture as practical guidance about conserving energy and staying put once a person is uncertain of direction. Both forms reflect the same problem. When sound becomes the primary cue, the mind tends to treat it as reliable distance. The land does not cooperate. A hollow can amplify a voice in one direction while absorbing it in another. A ridge can reflect a call, so it seems to come from behind. Search and rescue practice accounts for this by using deliberate sound attraction methods, including whistles and repeated call and listen cycles. The goal is not to fill the forest with noise. The goal is to create a simple, sharp signal that can cut through wind, water, and trees, then to pause long enough to hear a reply. This approach matters in dense conifers and in fog, where visual scanning does less than expected. In those settings, a responsive person may orient toward the sound even when they cannot orient toward a trail. A documented incident in the White Mountains of New Hampshire shows how sound can become the main bridge between a lost person and a known route. In early May 2009, New Hampshire Fish and Game asked the Upper Valley Wilderness Response Team to assist with a search for a missing hiker described as a 63-year-old man who had gone missing on or around Franconia Ridge. The account, written later by a rescuer and published through the Appalachian Mountain Club, an Appalachia journal, describes the call-out occurring on what was already day 4 of the search, with the missing hiker believed to have spent multiple freezing nights out with limited clothing or gear. The setting is useful for understanding why sound becomes decisive. Franconia Ridge includes long stretches above treeline where wind dominates, then abrupt transitions into dense spruce and fir where visibility drops and sound becomes uneven. The same account notes knee-high snow in places and difficult footing on packed ice and drifted sections. These are conditions that encourage a lost person to move downhill toward shelter, while also pulling them into drainages and side slopes where trails are harder to find again. During the briefing, the rescuer recorded basic descriptive details, including the subject's age and general physical profile, and notes that there was no known trip itinerary. The same briefing included medical information reported to searchers, describing the missing hiker as diabetic, on medication for high blood pressure, and with arthritis in his knees. Those details shaped search assumptions because they suggested limited mobility and a higher likelihood that the person would be unable to travel far once cold and fatigued. The account describes multiple teams working different probability areas at the same time, including dog teams and searchers assigned to drainages and low-lying areas based on the common expectation that an overdue hiker may travel downhill. It also describes how the assigned team approached the work in a methodical way along established trails, scanning for signs that someone had left the tread, such as footprints, veering off, or small items out of place. In that kind of search, sound is not treated as a dramatic last resort. It is treated as a routine tool that can quickly convert a wide, uncertain area into a narrower direction of travel. The same source describes sound attraction directly, explaining how frequent whistle blasts and calling out the missing person's name are used to locate a conscious and responsive subject, especially when darkness, fog, or dense evergreens limit visibility. The rescuer distinguishes an effective whistle from small built-in pack whistles, emphasizing a loud signal followed by listening for a response. This detail aligns with how experienced search groups treat sound as a map. A clear, repeated acoustic marker can become the only stable reference a lost person has, particularly if they cannot read a compass, cannot see a ridgeline, or is moving through thick trees where every direction looks the same. As the team progressed, the narrative notes a transition from relatively open hardwood visibility into denser conifers, where the ability to spot a person visually diminishes. In those stands, sound can travel in short bursts and then vanish. A lost person might hear a whistle once and misjudge the direction, especially if the signal is refracted by rock outcrops or wind. That is one reason search protocols emphasize repetition and pauses. One call is not a line. Multiple cycles create a pattern that can be tracked. The account includes a moment above tree line where the searchers spoke with two Canadian hikers in poor visibility and oriented them on the ridge. Later, after search teams returned to the trailhead at the end of the day, one of those hikers ran into the parking lot, reporting that they had found the missing man alive. The subject was described as wet, cold, and unable to walk, located near the Falling Waters Trail corridor. The same narrative links the outcome back to sound attraction, describing the missing man being drawn toward the trail and indicating that persistent whistle blasts and calling out helped attract him to a place where he could be found. In practical terms, the whistle did not locate him in the way a Jeep's coordinate does. It gave him a direction that was more reliable than his own internal sense of where the trail should be. It also created a shared reference between the searchers and anyone else moving through that corridor. This is the point where folklore and procedure tend to overlap in Appalachian contexts. When people later repeat an event like this, they often preserve the part that feels most tangible. A whistle is easy to picture. The wind and clouds are easy to picture. The idea of a sound leading someone out is also compatible with older Appalachian storytelling, where voices and calls are treated as meaningful signs. In the documented account, the emphasis stays procedural, with sound treated as one tool among many. In retellings, the same detail can become symbolic and take on a different weight. Sound also shapes witness memory, which matters in missing person reporting. People remember hearing something unusual more readily than they remember exact times and junction names. A faint reply can be remembered as closer than it was. A call that carries across a notch can be mislocated by a listener on the opposite wall of a drainage. In steep terrain, a person can shout and be heard by someone who is not positioned to reach them, while another person closer by hears nothing at all. Search planning tries to reduce this problem by recording who heard what, where they were standing, and what wind and weather were doing at the time, then treating those reports as clues rather than confirmations. Franconia Ridge in early May is not the southern Appalachians, but it sits inside the same larger mountain system and presents the same pattern that Appalachian folklore often describes in looser terms. Sound becomes the stand-in for distance when the usual cues fail. When that happens, an ordinary signal can take on outsized importance because it is the only thing that remains directional. In the account of the May 2009 search, the whistle is described not as a dramatic flourish, but as a functional method that can cut through fog and trees and convert a vast area into a corridor with edges. The nights when familiar landmarks stop working, darkness changes the way the mountains are read. A ridgeline that looks obvious at noon becomes a wall of black shapes after sunset. Headlamp light narrows the world into a small circle, and everything outside that circle becomes guesswork. Trails feel straighter than they are because only the next few steps are visible. When a person pauses, forest noise grows louder, and distance becomes hard to judge. In Appalachian communities, night travel is often discouraged in plain, inherited language. The warning is usually brief, offered as habit rather than instruction. Darkness erases the small cues people use to confirm they are still on a maintained route. A trail corridor can be missed by a few feet. A side path can imitate the main tread. A drainage can look like a gentle descent. When the temperature drops, decision-making can become hurried, and the urge to find a road or a familiar landmark can override careful navigation. This vulnerability appears in documented cases where the initial plan was an ordinary outing. On the 21st of October 2007, John Davis, Jack Bryant, aged 80, and Irene Woods Bryant, aged 84, left their home in Horseshoe, North Carolina, for a hike in Pisgah National Forest. They parked a maroon Ford Escape near Yellow Gap Road, close to U.S. Route 276, and did not return as expected. The disappearance was reported after the family could not reach them, and a search began in the forest area where their vehicle had been located. Investigators later learned from phone records that John Bryant attempted to call 911 on the day they vanished, but the call dropped because the signal was lost. That detail places a moment when help was sought but not obtained, and it suggests the couple was in terrain where ridges and hollows disrupt communication. In many Appalachian forests, a person can feel close to an access road while being effectively sealed off by topography. Search efforts used volunteers, dogs, and aerial support, expanding as days passed without contact. On the 10th of November 2007, searchers located a woman's body on a trail, covered with leaves. The body was later identified as Irene Bryant, and the case shifted from missing persons to homicide on federal land. Public reporting also noted that a bank card belonging to the Bryants was used for a cash withdrawal after their disappearance, adding an evidence trail that did not depend on eyewitnesses. For communities that live near these trailheads, the landscape details are what make the story repeatable. Yellow Gap Road is the kind of place people describe as not far from town because a vehicle can reach it and because it appears simple on a map. At night, that closeness can become deceptive. A person can walk parallel to a road without seeing it through rhododendron and hardwood trunks. A person can descend toward what seems like a route out and find that the drainage bends away. A flashlight beam turns the ground into a narrow tunnel, and the wider shape of the land is no longer visible. In February 2008, remains later identified as John Bryant were found in Nantahala National Forest in western North Carolina, extending the known geography of the crime beyond the original search corridor. Years later, the federal case against Gary Michael Hilton described the kidnapping and murder of John and Irene Bryant and resulted in 4 federal life sentences, along with additional penalties tied to robbery and firearms offenses. Some Appalachian caution language focuses on sound at night without treating it as evidence of anything supernatural. People say not to chase a call that cannot be placed, and to treat distant voices as unreliable in wind and trees. Ridges refract sound, and moving toward it can move a person off a known line. Search teams prefer signals, like whistles, to reduce ambiguity. Night is not the only factor in events like this, but it changes how small choices accumulate. It reduces verification, increases reliance on imperfect cues, and makes a short separation feel longer. In local speech, that becomes a simple warning about being out late. The record shows the same warning emerging from terrain, time, and the limits of perception, rather than from anything unseen. The spots where the trail stops, acting like a line. Trail maps present a path as a single continuous line. In the forest, that line is not always stable. Foot traffic widens some sections while storms erase others. Animals create parallel tracks. Old logging roads intersect the corridor at shallow angles and appear similar to maintained routes for short distances. A person following the ground instead of the markers can move onto a secondary path without noticing the moment of separation. In Appalachian terrain, these conditions appear frequently because the mountains have been used for many different purposes across time. Timber operations, fire roads, and abandoned farm lanes left faint corridors that remain visible decades later. Vegetation may cover them unevenly, allowing one segment to look like a maintained path while the next fades into leaf litter. When hikers meet such a junction unexpectedly, the decision can occur quickly. A direction that appears smoother or more open may feel correct, even if it leads away from the intended trail. Local speech sometimes frames these junctions as places where the trail splits without warning. It refers to moments where the ground itself offers 2 convincing directions, neither clearly marked. Appalachian folklore occasionally treats these points as locations where travelers are misled. The wording reflects the experience of stepping onto a wrong path that initially looks reliable. Search and rescue records show that wrong turn sequences often unfold gradually rather than in a single step. A hiker may follow a secondary track for several minutes before noticing that the markers have disappeared. By the time the absence is recognized, returning to the original junction may feel uncertain. The forest looks similar in every direction, and retracing steps becomes harder if the person has crossed rocky sections or leaf-covered ground that leaves few visible traces. One documented case illustrating this pattern occurred on the 1st of January 2019 in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. A 24-year-old hiker named Connor Little Bear Gano was traveling alone on the Appalachian Trail near Fontana Dam along the southern edge of the park. According to reports, he left the trail during winter conditions and became disoriented while attempting to navigate back toward the main route. Park rangers received notice that Gano was overdue, and a search operation began across sections of the Smokies, where hikers often exit the trail toward connecting roads and ridge paths. The area includes a network of older routes and backcountry trails intersecting the Appalachian corridor. During winter, leaf cover and snow patches can obscure tread patterns, making it harder to recognize the difference between maintained paths and older tracks. Search teams located Gano alive several days later after he had spent 4 nights in the forest. He was found in rugged terrain off the Appalachian Trail and required assistance to reach safety. Reports from the rescue noted that he had become disoriented after leaving the main corridor and struggled to relocate the trail. The geography of the southern Smokies helps explain how this sequence can develop. The Appalachian Trail crosses long ridges before descending toward major crossings like Fontana Dam. Along these ridges, older access roads and maintenance routes intersect the trail at angles that can appear nearly parallel for short stretches. If a traveler follows one of these tracks instead of the marked corridor, the mistake may remain unnoticed until the terrain changes. In winter months, the visual cues become weaker. Fallen leaves hide worn tread lines, and frost can flatten grasses that usually reveal the path. A side road used occasionally by park crews might appear clearer than the official footpath. When the corridor disappears behind a curve in the ridge, the person following the wrong direction may feel they are still moving along the correct route. Appalachian cautionary sayings sometimes address this situation indirectly. People warn newcomers to watch the blazes, not the ground. The phrase reflects the fact that trail markers are placed on trees at intervals to guide hikers through places where the path itself may fade. Losing sight of those markers can allow a secondary track to become the new line of travel without the hiker noticing the transition. Folklore language occasionally describes these places as if the forest rearranges the trail. In practical terms, the change usually comes from vegetation, erosion, or older human roots intersecting the modern corridor. The feeling of misdirection remains strong because the mistake is rarely obvious at the moment it happens. The ground still resembles a path, and the forest does not provide immediate evidence that the traveler has stepped away from the main route. Incidents like the Gano rescue circulate among hikers as reminders to pause at unclear junctions and verify direction using trail markers or maps. The stories remain simple in conversation, often reduced to a brief warning about stepping off the trail. The documented record shows the same pattern developing through small navigation decisions in terrain where many lines once existed. The clearings that hide what happened. Open ground in the Appalachians can feel like relief. A bald, a rock ledge, a cutover, or a wide overlook offers sky and distance after hours under canopy. It also removes the small signs people depend on when they try to reconstruct movement. Leaf litter holds scuffs, mud holds direction, bare stone holds almost nothing, and wind strips away what little remains. Folklore in mountain towns often treats these open places as thresholds. People describe them as spots where sound carries oddly, where weather changes quickly, and where a person should not assume they are seen just because the view is wide. The language can sound supernatural, but it overlaps with practical search problems. A clearing gives fewer track clues, offers more branching exits, and exposes a person to cold at the same time. Search planners treat open areas as places where sign can vanish. A person can cross and leave no readable trace on the far edge. If snow is present, wind can scour it into a clean surface. If rain follows, shallow prints collapse. If the ground is rock, the only evidence may be a dropped item at the margin, where the forest begins again. A case near the Appalachian Trail in eastern Pennsylvania shows how an exposed ridge feature can conceal a person even beside a heavily traveled corridor. On the 16th of January, 1977, hikers discovered a man's body in a cave near the Pinnacle a rocky viewpoint along the Appalachian Trail in Albany Township, Berks County. The man was unidentified for decades and became known publicly as the Pinnacle Man, a name taken from the landmark. The Berks County Coroner's Office later reported that the death was ruled an overdose with no sign of foul play, but identification did not follow at the time. The location matters because the Pinnacle sits on a ridge where the trail passes through exposed rock and overlooks before dropping back into forest. A person seeking shelter from cold or wind can step off the tread and disappear into fissures and shallow caves that are not visible from the main footpath. Rock also removes footprints and can hide a person below the sightline of passing hikers. For nearly 50 years, the man's identity remained unresolved. In 2019, authorities exhumed the remains to collect DNA, but the case still lacked a match. In August 2024, the breakthrough came through fingerprints rather than genetics. The Berks County Coroner's Office said the original fingerprint cards were located and submitted for comparison, and FBI fingerprint experts identified the man as 27-year-old Nicholas Paul Grubb of Fort Washington, Pennsylvania, with identification reported as occurring on the 12th of August 2024. News reporting described how the identification depended on recovering those records and connecting them through national systems used for missing and unidentified persons. A person can be physically present in a known place and still remain unnamed because the landscape and the administrative record do not always meet. Open ridge environments contribute to that separation in specific ways. A cave near a popular overlook is not deep wilderness. It is adjacent to a route many hikers use. Yet stone creates concealment that behaves differently than forest concealment. A person can be below a lip of rock and remain unseen. Wind can alter scent movement patterns, changing how dogs work the margins. Cold reduces the time in which a living subject can respond to calls. Searchers may grid the tree line, but rock corridors force them to rely on sightlines, timing, and chance encounters during cold snaps. Folklore often compresses these realities into a simpler warning. It treats an open place as if it takes ownership of what happens there. The record in the Pinnacle case stays procedural and limited, but it shows how certain landforms can interrupt evidence and delay understanding. Files that stay open after the search ends. A missing person search has an endpoint even when the person does not return. Helicopters leave. Command boards are packed away. Volunteers go back to work. What remains is paperwork, a case number, and a set of items placed into evidence storage. In the Appalachian region, and in the longer hiking corridors that connect to it, that administrative residue becomes part of the landscape storytelling. A person can be remembered by a trail name, a vague description, or a last known location, while their legal identity stays unknown inside a file. Folklore takes hold easily in that gap because the absence is visible and the record is not. People repeat what they saw at a shelter or on a road crossing. Then the details drift. The story becomes about the kind of person who would vanish, or the kind of place where it happened, rather than about what a coroner's office can confirm. At the same time, modern identification work depends on record systems that are not built for narrative. They rely on fingerprints, dental comparison, DNA, and matching a body to a missing person report that may never have been filed. A well-documented case tied to long-distance hiking culture illustrates how these files can stay open for years while the public discussion grows louder. On the 23rd of July 2018, 2 hikers found an unidentified man dead inside a tent in Big Cypress National Preserve near Ochapee, Florida. He carried no identification. The investigation could not determine a specific cause of death from the autopsy, and early checks of DNA, dental records, and fingerprints did not produce a match in available databases. The man had been known to people he met on trails by the nickname Mostly Harmless, along with other names used at different points. Accounts collected from hikers and trail angels placed him moving south through the eastern long-distance hiking network after time spent on the Appalachian Trail. His anonymity became central to the case. Without an identity, basic questions could not be answered in the administrative way investigators prefer, such as where to notify family, what medical history existed, and whether a disappearance had been reported in another state. The case file became unusual because it did not remain only inside law enforcement channels. It spread into online communities, where hikers and volunteers attempted to reconstruct a biography from small observations. Those efforts were not controlled by a single agency, and they produced a public narrative that sometimes moved faster than confirmed information. A major point of public attention came through reporting that described the man's lack of identification, the trail name he used, and the small set of objects found with him. including a notebook with notes related to a coding game. From an administrative perspective, this is where the case fits the theme of Appalachian folklore and missing people. A trail name functions like folklore. It is a social label passed by word of mouth, and it can outlast legal documentation. Many hikers never learn the surnames of the people they meet. They learn a nickname, a direction of travel, and a few facts offered in conversation. When a death or disappearance occurs, those fragments become the public record long before the official record is complete. The identification process in the mostly harmless case shows how files remain active even when there is no new search activity in the field. Over time, the Collier County Sheriff's Office sought additional help, including genetic genealogy support through Othram, a company that has worked with agencies to identify unknown decedents through DNA-based family matching. The decisive lead, however, came from a human recognition step rather than a map or a sighting. According to reporting and official summaries, a former co-worker recognized photos of the unidentified man in December 2020 and contacted authorities. On the 12th of January 2021, the Collier County Sheriff's Office announced that the man known publicly as mostly harmless had been identified as Vance John Rodriguez. Reporting described the identification being confirmed with DNA testing involving relatives. The administrative outcome was straightforward. A name was attached to a body, a family could be notified, and the file could move from unidentified to identified, even if every detail of the person's final months remained limited to what could be supported by evidence. The public afterlife of the case remained shaped by trail culture. A person had moved through a community where introductions were informal and records were optional. The same pattern appears in many Appalachian disappearance conversations, even when the underlying circumstances are different. Trail systems are social networks without paperwork. When someone stops appearing, the memory of their name may be the least stable element. These identifications are not the same as solving a mystery in a narrative sense. They are record repairs. They align an unknown body with an existing life history that may be scattered across states, jobs, and personal relationships. In regions where missing people become part of folklore, the file is the counterweight to drift because it forces specificity. It requires a date, a location, an agency, and a confirmed identity, even when the story people prefer is built from impressions. If you found this video interesting, consider subscribing for more videos like this one. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you think deserve attention. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.